Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin wa ba'd. So this evening what we're going to be doing, this is the fourth Tuesday. If you're with us for the program, the first and third Tuesdays are going to be for tafsir, and the second, fourth are going to be for this particular book called Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin. Believe it or not, we've been reviewing this textbook for several years, piece by piece. We're getting close to the halfway point. And we have started, I believe, a year ago, Ramadan perhaps, if I'm not mistaken, looking at some of the destructive vices. And tonight we're going to pick up in a chapter of this book, which is entitled Kasru Shahwatain, which basically means the destruction or the control of two desires. Shahwat al-Batan, which is the desire of what we'd call the belly, and shahwat al-farj, which is the desire of the private region, right? So two carnal desires that can be destructive vices if they are not controlled and tempered with one's faith. So we should know and remember the Prophet ﷺ describing the way shaitan influences us. He says, the shaitan flows through the son of Adam like blood flows through his veins. Think about the very physical aspect of this, flowing through Ibn Adam like blood flows through the veins. And our scholars talk about this in a very physical way, not a metaphorical way, a very physical way, in that they say man's sustenance or nourishment is diminished in his veins when it's restricted. So yes, we're talking about how much you eat. And that's essentially what we're looking at in the first section of this chapter. So when your sustenance is diminished or it's constricted, it's controlled, you're unable to produce an abundant amount of blood, which is often the result of course, the abundance of blood is from the abundance of nourishment. And this will result in the heart not being overwhelmed with what we might say, shaitan flowing through it. As a result, it will be purified, and its light, the light of the heart, will shine through. So by doing this, meaning you constrict how much you eat, and the scholars also talk about not only how much you eat, but there's also some discourse regarding when you eat and what you eat. In this text, he doesn't get into any of that, but if you did go back to the origin text, which is Imam al-Ghazali's Ihya, you would find that he talks about this to some level of detail, when and what should be eaten. But we're just going to get an idea or the general concept here. And so when you restrict the diet, if you will, you can overcome the influence of shaitan. The desires are the result of the pumping veins, the blood which pumps through the veins from abundant nutrition, as I mentioned, and therefore if blood flow is restricted due to a restricted level of nourishment, the evil influence of the human spirit is also restricted. So it's a 1 + 1 = 2 type of a situation. If you do this, then this will happen. And by repelling this evil, the evil influence, with this type of exercise, it's important to understand that spiritual growth and development is connected to physical exercise. Physical exercise is extremely important. Like the prayer, there's a lot of physical movement and exercise in what we do. We stand, we bow, we sit, we make sujood, this prostration, and all of that is an attempt to aid the human heart to follow along in those movements, because those movements are all very symbolic. Each one of the movements in prayer is symbolic of something. It has a meaning, is a richer meaning to just the mechanical aspect. And the idea behind the concept is that you're putting your body through something, and your heart, if it is not, it should eventually follow. So when you're standing, your heart should be at attention. When you're bowing, your heart should be humbled and bowing. When you're making sujood, your heart should be, in a state of submissiveness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so here, we're talking about something similar, that a physical action, an operation, or an exercise that you perform is going to have an impact, a direct impact on the heart, on the human spirit. So by repelling these influences and this evil with this type of exercise, this servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can focus on worshiping Allah with full concentration and full taqwa. The pinnacle of taqwa, by the way, is not achieved until the desires are opposed. So these things don't go together. Following your desires and having taqwa, they are opposites, one to the other. So you have to oppose your desires. You have to fight your desires and your whims and lusts, and you have to fight the human spirit, which we might say is the nafs, and you also have to break the strength of that spirit in some way or another. And if this happens, the servant has been granted. This happens, I should say, when you've been granted a variety of blessings and you're given many things which you enjoy and crave, and you recognize this as a test, and you restrain yourself. You show restraint. It's not like, I don't have it, so I'm just going through it. There's a difference between I don't have and I'm starving. If I had food, I would gluttonously eat it. But it's I have it, along with many other great blessings, but I am able to show self-control. So it's the presence is there, but you're able to exercise control, as opposed to, I just don't have it, so there's no control being exercised. It's just my reality. There's a very difference between the two. And so this type of overcoming or overpowering your desires occurs when these things are available to you. You do enjoy them. You crave them perhaps, but you recognize it as a test and a trial, and so therefore you show some type of restraint. And so if you can overcome and conquer these desires, then, and only then, will you be set free. Meaning, until you can overcome those desires, you are enslaved to those desires. They are controlling you, or you're allowing them to control you. Basically, you're acting on impulse. You're acting in a very, very, I guess you could say, animalistic way. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes it as such in the Quran in multiple different verses, that people acting in a very animalistic way. And that's essentially what the Imam, he says, that if you are unable to eradicate these desires, you will be lumped together in that category of the animals. So here in this text, of course, this is a summary. Remember, mukhtasar, this is a summary of the initial summary. So this is a double summary, if you will. The author, he says that shahwatul batni min a'zam al-muhlakat. That the desire of the belly, of the stomach, is min a'zam al-muhlakat, is from the greatest destructive vices, the greatest means of destruction. And that might be hard to imagine when we live in a world where we live in abundance. We live in abundance. It might be hard to imagine that. Wow, could this be a real thing? Food is how much you eat. Is this a real problem? Yes. Scholars have identified this based on what the Prophet ﷺ, based on his life, his practice, his sunnah, his instruction, his guidance, and that of his great companions, and then the righteous that followed after them. It's also noted that because of shahwat al-batan, the desire of the stomach, the appetite, if you will, Adam alayhi salam was expelled from Jannah. Do you remember why he was expelled from Jannah? From the tree. He ate from the tree. The appetite was there, and it wasn't restrained or controlled. So he ate from the tree, and of course that was prohibited. They were allowed to eat what they wished, except from that tree. And of course, as the story goes, he and his wife Hawa, they were overcome by this appetite, and they ate from the tree. The desire that they had for it overwhelmed them. along with shaitan whispering and inciting to them a number of different things. As the result of that, their aura was exposed, and they were expelled from the bliss and the honor that they were living in to a place of humiliation and impoverishment, a lowly place called dunya. Dunya meaning a lowly place. So that's where it ended up. And because of that appetite or lack of control, our father Adam alayhi salam was expelled from Jannah. So now you can see, if you take those things, put them together, you can see how destructive the appetite can actually be. He goes on and he says, from this shahwat al-batan, it's a trigger for al-farj wal-raghba fil mal. It triggers the desire, the sensual desires, as well as desire for wealth. So basically he's saying it starts here, and then it is like a domino effect, one leading to the next. And then after that, there are many things that follow, destructive things that follow after that. All of them are from reckless filling of one's stomach. They all come from reckless satiation, to be full. That's where it begins. The Prophet ﷺ, he said in a hadith, says, أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال المؤمن يأكل في معى واحد, that the believer eats in one intestine, if you will, and the disbeliever eats in 7 of them, 7 intestines. Showing you the difference between the level of consumption here, in that the believer, they consume less than the disbeliever. And this hadith is found in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. If you look at some of the narrations, it was narrated that there was a man, the longer, I guess, hadith, if you will, and the longer narration of this particular hadith, that a man used to eat a lot, but when he embraced Islam, it was noted that he started eating less. And the Prophet ﷺ then mentioned a believer eats in one intestine, basically meaning satisfied with less food, and the kafir, or the disbeliever, eats in 7 intestines, meaning that he eats a lot. There's another hadith found in Sahih Muslim, similar in meaning, which Abu Hurairah reported that the Prophet ﷺ invited a non-Muslim. And the Prophet ﷺ commanded that a goat be milked for him. And the goat was milked, and that man, he drank the milk. The Prophet ﷺ ordered that a second goat be milked for him, and that he drank that milk. And then another one was milked for him, and he drank that milk. And the Prophet ﷺ continued ordering that the goats be milked until 7 of them were milked, and the man drank all of that milk, consumed from 7 goats. He came to the Prophet ﷺ to embrace Islam. So this was his initial encounter with the Prophet ﷺ, in that he gave him as he desired. You want more? Here's more. More? Okay, keep going. There are numerous, I should say, narrations of this story. One of which, the servant, I believe, that was assisting the Prophet ﷺ with his goats, became agitated that the man was eating or drinking all of the milk, because, suppliers are not like here. You just go get another gallon, just go get another gallon. They keep bringing all the gallons. It's like, look, there's a limited number of sheep and there's a limited supply of milk. And I can't believe this guest is just like, will not stop. There's no restraint being showed here. He's just drinking and drinking. The Prophet ﷺ basically said that he has eaten, they said, he's eaten all of our provisions, but Allah is our provider. Meaning, we'll get more, don't worry about it. And he kept giving. So the man, he accepted Islam. And then he came back to the Prophet ﷺ the next day. The Prophet ﷺ had him sit down and commanded that a goat be milked for him. And the milk was brought. And the man started to drink the milk, but was unable to finish the entire amount that was served to him. And that's when the Prophet ﷺ said, a believer drinks in one intestine. So the first one was eats in one intestine. And this one is drinks in one intestine, whereas a non-believer drinks in 7 intestines. Here, again, talking about the amount that is consumed. While some scholars say that this is literal, some say that, it would seem that that's incorrect based on what you can tell in modern day medicine and human biology. There's not 7 intestines, or it's a digestive system. So this is the important thing to understand, is that in Islam, we're not obliged to believe in things that are not real. So, like when it comes to worldly things, which are tangible, they're measurable, they've been witnessed, they've been understood. We're not obliged to believe in something that is opposite to that. So to take this on for face value as it is, literally, would be someone's understanding, but because it contradicts reality, we would say this is an erroneous understanding. So what is meant here? Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, he comments on this hadith, and he says that there are a group that say the hadith is addressing the desire of this world. When someone says, like, when someone says, akala fulana dunya, that so-and-so has akala fulana dunya aklan, so-and-so has eaten this world like majorly. It means that they have a desire for this world. They covet this world, and so they're like a big consumer of this world. They desire after it and they covet. So when the hadith says that the believer eats with one intestine, it means that they abstain from overeating or over drinking, and they only consume a meager amount. Whereas the disbeliever eats with 7 intestines, meaning they consume things in abundance. And it doesn't just have to be food and drink. I mean, here that's what we're talking about specifically, but consumption can be in anything. Okay? I bought a new pair of shoes. They got dirty. I'm not going to clean them. I'm just going to go buy a new one. I'm not going to try and reuse and fix and mend and take care of and prolong the life of something because I'm a consumer. I have such a desire for this world. I'm going to go buy a brand new one, even though they can be salvaged and used. Right? So this type of consumption, it goes across the board. However, the main point here is, as mentioned in the hadith, eating and drinking. And so the believer, they show restraint and they show control. And this hadith is basically encouraging the believer to eat less because it's known that the disbeliever eats a lot. The believer is encouraged to eat less because the disbeliever is known to eat a lot. Does that mean there are believers that eat a lot? Or that don't eat a lot, I should say? Are there believers that don't eat a lot? No, there are believers that eat a lot. And does that mean that there are no disbelievers that can show restraint? No, there are many disbelievers, non-Muslims, that can show restraint. There are. We're not talking about what is present. We're talking about what is typical, or the mindset of many, or what the mindset typically is. So the idea is that the people of faith, they are eating and consuming less than those that lack faith. And this is because the believer by nature seeks to be different than the disbeliever. That should be our nature. When we see them doing something, especially something wrong, we are going to try and do the opposite of that. And we know that the believer eats a lot, as is mentioned in the Quran in Surah Muhammad. This is verse 47, chapter 47, verse number 12, when Allah says, وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا يَتَمَتَّعُونَ وَيَأْكُلُونَ كَمَا تَأْكُلُ الْأَنْعَامُ. Basically, and for the disbelievers, they enjoy themselves and feed or eat like cattle. كَمَا تَأْكُلُ الْأَنْعَامُ. They eat like cattle, right? And what does the cow do? Grazes all day long, constantly. And that's where you would find the scholars talk about when to eat. And so many of them, many of them talk about eating and how often to eat. I don't really want to hurt your feelings with this, right? But they do have some guidance on that particular issue. So anyway, the scholars conclude that here the hadith encourages us to consume this world in sparse amounts and to abstain from abundance and to be pleased with little. So this hadith and the various other narrations that are similar to this all have a very, very similar meaning to that. There's another statement from Uqba. He says, I entered upon Al-Hasan while he was eating. And basically, he was like, you know, go ahead. And he said, I ate so much that I can't eat anymore. And then Hassan, he said, Subhanallah. Does the Muslim eat until they can't eat anymore? He said, sorry, I can't join you because I've already eaten so much I can't eat anymore. He said, okay, well, how's that even possible? The Muslims shouldn't eat as much that they cannot eat anymore. So this is one extreme. We're highlighting one extreme where a person eats to the point that they're so full, and we may all be guilty of this from time to time, hopefully lesser than more, right? We should be very careful with this. However, you can go to the other extreme, right? So one extreme is eating to the point that you're so full you can't eat anymore. And the other extreme, which he notes here, that some of the zuhad, which are like those that refrain, they abstain from this life, have reduced the amount of food that they eat and are so patient with hunger that it has an impact on them, essentially. They are taking it to an extreme, and he says that we have basically clarified this praiseworthy nature of trotting such a path in other works. Basically, what we're looking to do is find moderation here, not going to the extremes on either side, basically eating too much or not eating enough, but getting right in the sweet spot. So what is the sweet spot? How much should you be eating? That's the question. How do you know when to stop eating? So he says here that the middle way, if you will, is to eat and stop while there's still some desire to eat more. You eat enough, and then you stop before you're like, all right, I don't want any more. You have to stop just before that point where you say, I don't want any more. You need to stop at the point where it's still like, yeah, I could do some more. Because that's restraint. When you get to the point of, I don't want any more, that's not restraint. That's a reaction to what you just did to yourself. You're reacting to overeating. Now it's, oh, I don't want any more, I'm so full. So there's no restraint or control exercised in that type of a diet. It's just eating until the body, the natural, very like base function of the body basically says, all right, stop. You've overdone it. Right? So here is giving you a measure of I've eaten enough, I still could eat some more, I actually still want to eat a little more, but I'm going to stop eating. And then at the end of that, so there's a threshold here. This is the beginning of the threshold, if you will. Or I should say this is around the middle of the threshold, if you will. And the end of that threshold, where you're going to pass overeating, he says, is, as the Prophet ﷺ said, ثُلُثٌ لِلطَّعَامِ, a third for food, وَثُلُثٌ لِلشَّرَابِ, and a third for drink, وَثُلُثٌ لِلنَّفَسِ, which is a third for being able to breathe. So here you're getting kind of an idea of what would be the end point of eating. And we often think of this because we hear this, a lot of us, 1/3 for food, 1/3 for drink, and 1/3 for air, if you will. We think that's the golden standard. That is the end. That's the red line right there. And that is, as the Prophet ﷺ, he says, that if you have no choice, if you're pushed to that point, then 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3. Meaning like, that's the red line, you don't cross with it. So that's not the standard, that's kind of the end. The standard is, as I mentioned here, or as the author mentions, that you stop just before you lose your appetite. So the balance here, as he mentions, when it comes to eating, the balance is what will provide the proper amount of nutrients to the body and will help prevent sickness and disease. He says, and that is, of course, repeating this, eating food until, or I should say, eating when you're hungry and stopping before you're full. That's another a golden rule, if you will, kind of a principle here. Eat when you're hungry and stop before you're full. So that means it might not be breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Because for many of us, that's a habit. It's a part of a cultural practice. We have to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Just like the certain types of foods that we eat in the day. Breakfast has this type of food, lunch has this type of food, and dinner has this type of food. In some cultures, you don't eat the dinner meal at the breakfast time, and you don't eat the breakfast meal at the dinner time. Right? So there's some cultural aspects to eating. And then sometimes there's a breakfast, there's a snack, there's a lunch, there's a snack, there's a dinner, there's a snack. Okay? Or there's no control whatsoever. There's just a snack and a meal and a snack and a snack and a double snack and a triple snack, and then we've lost control. We just as I said, just constantly grazing. Sometimes there's eating for social reasons. Sometimes there's eating out of boredom. Sometimes there's eating out of an emotional crisis is happening as a mechanism to cope and to self-medicate, if you will, to soothe yourself with eating. Okay? So the rule is eat when you're hungry, stop before you're full. He says here that if you can do this regularly, it will weaken you. It will weaken that power of desire. But you don't want to go too far in this, because there were people that they reduced their diet so much that it impeded their ability to fulfill their obligations. Right? They were so drained and so malnourished that they couldn't fulfill the basic obligations of a Muslim. And they thought, and this was out of their ignorance, that type of excessive restraint was a virtue. However, it's not a virtue, because you do need to have enough strength that you can fulfill your obligations and enough strength to do what's required of you. And the amount of food that you require may fluctuate based on the season and what it is that you're doing. So whoever has praised hunger among the scholars and the righteous of the past, whoever praises hunger, they're praising the hunger which is considered moderate, which the author mentions here. The hunger which is considered to be moderate. There's another hadith to reiterate this point. The Prophet ﷺ, to highlight more about the amount of food, the Prophet ﷺ was heard to have said, "No man fills a container worse than his stomach. A few morsels that keep his back upright are sufficient for him. If he has to, then he should keep 1/3 for food, 1/3 for drink, and 1/3 for breathing." Again, as I mentioned that hadith earlier. So here the Prophet ﷺ talking about, again, the minimum and the maximum. In this hadith, he highlights the minimum. The minimum is to eat enough to keep your back upright, meaning to keep enough strength so that you can perform. And the maximum he highlights is 1/3, 1/3, and the last 1/3. This hadith is a very popular, well-known hadith. It's reported by Imam Ahmad, At-Tirmidhi, and Ibn Majah. It's also found in the collection of Imam Nawawi's hadith with the additions of Ibn Rajab. So this is from the additions of Ibn Rajab that he added to the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi. And basically, Ibn Rajab highlights something in his explanation of this hadith, and he says that the Prophet ﷺ conquered Khaybar. If you're following our Jummah khutbahs, we're not yet there. We'll be getting there soon, inshallah. So when he conquered Khaybar, they found that it was an area ripe with abundant fruit. And the people, when they got a hold of that, they devoured it just right away. And then they complained to the Prophet ﷺ of feeling sick. They came down with fevers. and were complaining. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that the fever is Imam al-Maut. It's the leader of death, meaning it's going to precede it. And the fever is Allah's prison on earth. It's a piece of hell, he said, right? The heat. He said, you've been afflicted by that, and so you need to cool off. And he instructed them to pour water over their bodies between Salat al-Maghrib and Salat al-Isha. So they did that, and then they came back and they reported that the heat, the fever had gone away. And the Prophet ﷺ, he then said that Allah did not create a vessel which is filled more evil than the stomach. And so if you have to, make a third of it for food, a third of it for drink, and a third of it for air. So that's the context of that particular hadith, showing you that the companions, they did go overboard in this occasion, and he sought to correct their behavior. Ibn Rajab also mentions in his explanation here that this particular hadith, the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, is a hadith which serves as a foundation for the fundamentals of medicine. And he goes on to mention how the scholars of medicine of the past, hearing about this hadith, would say that if people would apply this hadith, then they would avoid a great deal of sickness and disease, and they would put the pharmaceutical stores out of business, or many of them, right? This was, of course, during that time, quite some time ago. And today, you can see a similar thing. What overeating does and what it causes. So, according to the CDC, people who are overweight or obese, compared to those with healthy weight, are at increased risk for many diseases and health conditions, just because of overeating. And the CDC lists things. And the first thing they list is all causes of death. They're at a greater risk for all causes of death because of being overweight. They're also at greater risk of having high blood pressure, high LDL cholesterol, low HDL cholesterol, type 2 diabetes, coronary heart disease, stroke, gallbladder disease, osteoarthritis, which is a breakdown of cartilage and bone within the joint, sleep apnea and breathing problems, along with many types of cancer, low quality of life, a mental illness such as clinical depression, anxiety, and other mental disorders, body pain and difficulty with physical functioning. So that's what's mentioned by the CDC. The National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases added the following: pregnancy problems, fertility problems, sexual function problems. People that are overweight are more likely to run into these than those of a healthy weight. So here you can see even today's modern medicine is basically talking about the same thing that our great scholars and doctors of the past, looking at the Prophet's prescription of what a healthy diet looks like, we're talking about. So these are some of the obviously physical benefits that you get, obviously being able to curtail or avoid some of those potential sicknesses and diseases. And that's extremely important. We cannot overlook the importance of physical health as people of faith. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us and blessed us with capable bodies, functioning bodies, that if taken care of, they will be in their prime and they will function at high levels. And because that's a trust that's given to us, we have to look after that trust and take care of it. That's extremely important. Abusing the body in such a way could be considered the denial of a blessing, which is kufr ni'mah, the denial of one of Allah's blessings by not taking care of the things that you've been blessed with. So these are some of the physical aspects. There are also numerous spiritual benefits. So Ibn Rajab, he says that restricting sustenance, it softens the heart, sharpens the mind. You can find this as well from Ibn al-Ghazali. Al-Ghazali mentions 10 benefits that are the result of hunger. So sharpening the mind, it tames the human spirit, it weakens both the desire, shahwa, as well as anger. Right? When you're a little bit hungry and you're in a weakened state. And overeating does the opposite. Hardens the heart, dulls the mind, fuels the human spirit and strengthens both desire and anger. From the great Imams, Al-Mawrudi, he said that Imam Ahmad would praise hunger and poverty. Imam Ahmad's story is quite magnificent, including some of these aspects of his life. He asked him, if a man who abandons his desires, like these types of desires to eat and consume, etc., he said, would a man like that be rewarded? And Imam Ahmad said, how could he not be rewarded while Ibn Omar, the great companion of the Prophet ﷺ, son of the great companion of the Prophet ﷺ, said, I have not been satiated for 4 months. Ibn Omar would go these durations. And it wasn't because he didn't have, he had. He chose not to overindulge. He would not eat till his belly was full. And he would say, I went 4 months without being full. There are other hadith in which there were years that some of the righteous companions, they said, we went years and years and years without eating to the point that we were satiated, we were full. And then he said to Imam Ahmad, can a man have a soft heart while he's full? And he said, I don't think that's possible. So this narration from Ibn Omar is narrated by Imam Ahmad. There are multiple chains of narration. In one narration, a man asked Ibn Omar if he could bring him some digestive medicine. He said, I want to bring you something that helps digestion. And Ibn Omar asked him what that thing would do. He said, I'm bringing you this thing. He said, well, what's that thing going to do? And he said, it'll help you digest food. Like, you can eat a lot and it'll help you. Like today, we got those like magic pills that people think you take. I'm going to take it. It's going to burn fat. It's going to help digestion. It's going to get it going. I can eat anything I want, just go crazy. I'm going to pop a pill and it's going to take care of everything. I can buy it right here at the corner store too. It's like, yeah, whatever. So basically he's saying here, you can have this, digest some food. It's going to help you. And he said, I haven't eaten to my full in 4 months. Like, what do I need this stuff for? I don't have a problem with that. I don't eat all that much. And he said, and that's not because I can't, but because I came to know people who went hungry more than you go full. Talking about the Prophet and the companions. I came to know people who went hungry more than you went full. So he had the opportunity. He did, however, choose to show restraint. Many of the scholars of the past would consider a full stomach a means to a hard heart. They would say that a man that would eat until he was full was like a man who committed a sin. They would hold them in contempt, just like a person who they held in contempt for committing a sin. They said, if you have a full stomach, consider yourself sick until it becomes empty. Eating was the test of Adam, and it will be our test until the day of resurrection. So, having said that, what do? Right? We have a general idea, and this is where we're going to wrap up for this evening. How do you go about gaining control over the desire to overeat? So, first he says that this exercise of gaining control over the desire to overeat or to fill your stomach, for someone who is accustomed to being satiated, you've become accustomed to every time you sit down, you got to eat until you're full. You have such a hard time walking away, right? And you get used to this type of thing, right? It's taken time. It's taken time for you to get to that point, and it's going to take time if you want to successfully move away from that to get to a point of control. He says, and so here, what the person needs to do is to restrict their food in the slightest degree and do this over a period of time. And they continue to do that. This is like a sustainable diet, not like a fad diet where you go, I'm going to go on a crash diet for 2 weeks or a month, or I'm going to do 12 weeks of a crash diet, and then I'm going to just kick back up to eating whatever I wanted to eat normally before that. No, this is you start off with a minor deviation to your normal eating habit where you now restrict just a little bit. And you go for a period of time. And then once you've gotten to the point where you're accustomed to that, and then you do just a little bit more, and then you continue until you're accustomed to that, and then you reduce it by a little bit more, and then you get to the point where you reach that middle moderate course that we have described before, where you're able to pull your hand up before the desire is lost, right? Where you are eating when you're hungry and stopping before you're full. So it's something that takes patience. And like they say, slow and steady wins the race. And that's how this has to be approached. Otherwise, you'll never conquer that desire. You might conquer it for a short period of time, a couple of weeks you might be able to go. When you really restrict yourself, it's going to cause extreme discomfort, irritability. There's a load of things that will come with that, and that's just not something that most people can sustain. It should be noted that like sports scientists and dietitians, they talk about something very significant here. And when they talk about it, they're not talking about it from a spiritual perspective. They're talking about purely from sports science and performance and physique. They say that typically people that can show restraint when eating and can control their diet, you know, not only how much but what they eat. They're looking for nutritious foods that are going to fuel them for whatever thing that they're doing, whatever sport they're involved in or activity that they want to reach a high level of performance. And those that are performing at a very high level, the way that they're able to show restraint in eating is often an indication that they have resilience, that they have a level of resilience. And that's required of us as people of faith, to have a level of resilience. That's part of sabr, patience, and hilm, forbearance. And those are things that are lofty aims and objectives in our religion. Right? Those are and patience and forbearance are things that you have to work toward and you have to develop within yourself. And as developing those things, this is one of the exercises that helps you develop that as well, to develop that resilience and that mental fortitude. So, as I said, you're going to go through this process little by little. Eventually, you're going to get to that middle course. And basically, he says, you're going to eat to the degree that you're not prevented from performing your acts of worship. You're going to eat enough so that you have the strength required for that. You're going to eat enough so that you do not feel like you're hungry or satiated. That's when you are in the middle course. I'm not hungry, but I'm not full. I'm right there in the middle. And at this point is when the body will be at its healthiest state. And at this point is when your focus will sharpen and your mind will clear. You know, that brain fog that often is associated with overeating. That overeating and then you're tired and you feel heavy and lethargic and you need to go take a nap. That's what he mentions here. People will continue to eat food until that food wants them to go, that type of eating wants them to go to sleep. They will be dull, meaning mentally dull, and they will have a hard time focusing and concentrating. So, and then of course that leads to ailments and disease, as he mentions here. So if you get to that point, right, and this is the last point I want to mention for the evening, as he points out here, when you get to the point where you have mastered one of these vices, you have gained control over it, you don't want that to now lead you into another vice, which is ar-riya, like to show off. Okay? So you've conquered one thing, now to go show off to others that, hey, what's your problem? You know, look at me. I'm a master. I've gained control over this. You've fallen into another disaster, from one disaster to the next disaster. And he said that some of the people of the past, they would go out and purchase things that were objects of desire, and they would put them in their homes while they didn't actually want them there. And they did that so that it would cover their zuhd. It would hide their like abstention from these things. Basically he says this is zuhd of the zuhd, right? Because you're trying not to show off. You're trying not to put yourself on a pedestal. You're trying not to have somebody recognize, praise you for it, and then perhaps you become, conceited by that thing. And so they would make it appear as if it was the opposite. And this was the way of as-siddiqeen, those that were truthful. Basically, they would pour for themselves, he says, 2 cups of patience, the second cup being more bitter than the first. Basically, 2 doses of medicine, and the second one being the bitterest of those doses. So to conclude here, Imam al-Ghazali, as I said, mentions about 10 things of benefit that you can find in hunger, a moderate hunger. And he says that the Salaf, they said, al-ju' miftah wal-akhirah wa babu zuhd. That hunger is the key to the hereafter, and it is the door to abstention and restraint. And that's where we will conclude for this evening. The next time we get together for this book, again, 2nd and 4th Tuesdays, we will talk about the desire for sensual pleasure. Any questions or comments?